Hello everybody and welcome to this episode of Activist Lawyer. I'm in the studio with Jack.
Hello everybody.
And we are joined by Green Party MLA for North Down, Rachel Woods. Hi Rachel.
Hiya, how are you?
Thanks for joining us today.
No problem.
You had a bit of a morning getting here, but you made it.
Definitely.
So just by way of introduction, Rachel Woods is the Green Party MLA for North Down, as I mentioned, and is a member of the Justice Committee at Stormont. Rachel is a trained researcher and served on Ards and North Down Borough Council before becoming a member of the Legislative Assembly. Rachel is passionate about her local area, having grown up in Hollywood and still lives in the town. We just had a wee chat there about the lovely Hollywood. And she takes a particular interest in helping people through the welfare reform process and in schemes aimed at reducing plastic pollution. She has recently introduced a private member's bill to establish a statutory provision for paid leave for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. All of that we'll touch on. Rachel, thanks for coming in today. So again, activist lawyer, we've had so many different people on the show. We're 1 year today, so yeah, it's our anniversary.
Well, playing the music.
Yeah, so I forgot about that. But we had quite a few people on over the last 12 months. It's been fantastic from all different backgrounds, mostly practitioners, but also academics, activists and campaigners. So it's great to have you here today, a member of the Justice Committee and somebody who can maybe take us through how we get to the stage we're at in terms of development of important legislation, where we're at in Northern Ireland, and give us some insight into that. So I think it's very, very important to have you here too. So just firstly though, how did you get to where you are? I mean, politics in Northern Ireland is probably a little bit daunting, but yet here you are.
I know, it's certainly not something that I thought that I would be getting into or be involved in. It wasn't certainly a dream that I had, say, from a child. You know, it wasn't on the career path mapped out in the head. But my background is hospitality, so it quite suits being in politics now. Actually,
really?
Yeah, because you have to deal with people. So, and you have to be listening to people, and you have to sort of prioritise time and so on. But I suppose at university, it was really whenever I got involved into sort of activist politics and going to protests, love a good protest, and caring about social justice issues, and it became more relevant and more important to me. But my undergrad involved a little bit of politics. I did history and philosophy at Queen's, and then I did a master's degree in terrorism and security.
Wow.
So legal issues and political issues were obviously combined.
Absolutely.
So it was very, very political. But I was taught as part of that degree by a professor at Queen's called John Barry, and he was a serving councillor for the Green Party in Ards and North Down. So I had done a little bit of work with the Green Party in terms of volunteering roles, and then when the opportunity came to step in to a council-related role, as one of our councillors had to stand down for personal reasons, I thought, I'm fed up screaming at the TV and being annoyed that people in my area don't represent me. So go and do it, just to take the chance. So it wasn't a political family growing up, but we were certainly aware. I knew who Mo Molan was. She was somebody that was very important. I knew that the Good Friday Agreement was something that caused debate around my kitchen table, but certainly was not growing up in a political family, and it was certainly not a path that I thought was going to take me to where I'm sitting here now. But whenever Stephen Agnew's my predecessor in North Down, he stood down actually 2 years ago, a couple of weeks ago, so it's my anniversary as well, I suppose. Anniversary month. So that was I was nominated by the constituency group then to take over from his seat. So yeah, it's been a very whirlwind journey the last 5 years.
I'd say so. And particularly, I know we've had a few chats before this. There's always something going on. So there's never a kind of free period for you. And I know there's so much to talk about, but I guess what we'll focus on was something that you and I had a chat about beforehand, which is your involvement in bringing forward legislation around the Domestic Abuse and Family Proceedings Act now. So I wonder, could you take us through a little bit of that, maybe what spurred this piece of legislation on, and maybe the various stages to where we're at now, and maybe we could discuss a bit of the kind of content around it too that I think is important.
No problem at all. So the domestic abuse, it was the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, or bill, sorry, it's now the Domestic Abuse and Family Proceedings Act. So that was actually formulated by the previous Justice Minister, Claire Sugden, before the Assembly fell. So a lot of work had gone into getting that bill ready, getting the provisions ready, consultations with stakeholders and victims groups and so on. And unfortunately, the Assembly fell, and it was down for 3 years. So this then was taken up by the current Justice Minister, Naomi Long, as her priority legislation, and rightfully so. It had been worked on for a very long time, and it was an extremely important issue and an absolute disgrace that we didn't have specific legislation in Northern Ireland on domestic abuse and coercive control. So that was the first piece of legislation that was actually introduced to the Assembly whenever it came back, which was great to see, and that getting priority. And then as a member of the Justice Committee during a committee scrutiny period and scrutiny stage, that was my role then, is to scrutinise sort of line by line bills. So the bills in Stormont come through first stage, then second stage, which is a debate on the principles of the bill, and naturally that passed. I don't think anybody was turning around to say, no, we don't need domestic abuse legislation in Northern Ireland. And then it goes to the Justice Committee for, as I say, line by line scrutiny. So I took that role very seriously, and that's why I worked on a number of amendments to the bill. We were successful in getting amendments agreed by committee, which was meant that the committee brought forward amendments, but I also brought forward a number of my own as a private member. So even though I was on that committee, couldn't convince the committee to agree to all of them, but was able to put the debate to the floor of the House. So the ones that I was able to get on in my own name included sort of listening to the children's rights groups and the children's voices groups, and making sure that we had the same protection for children as they did in Scotland. And we also managed to change the legal aid setup here in Northern Ireland, which caused a bit of a stir at the time. But we have on the bill that in certain circumstances, victims of domestic abuse, despite their financial, what it may look like on the surface, for example, in cases of child contact orders, that they would be able to apply for a legal aid waiver.
Right, okay.
So it meant what we were doing is really, really listening to victims that were coming to us and coming to me, and I was talking to a lot of people who'd been through this, and how the courts are used as arenas of further abuse. But also, if we're going to take financial abuse seriously, then we can't just look at somebody who is, say, earning just over the threshold and say, no, well, you have to pay. And if you're being continuously taken back to court on child contact, which is what a lot of people are doing, that you should be financially liable for all of that, because it's draining people.
Absolutely.
Literally draining people. So it wasn't exactly what I'd wanted at the start, but an amendment was put onto the bill, and that was at consideration stage, then again at further consideration stage, and past final stage last year.
Excellent.
And then when does that come into effect then?
So the provisions of the bill, the Act now, the regulations are being commenced by February 2022, and that has been the most recent update from the department, which follows the same lines actually in Scotland. Once they introduced what the so-called gold standard of domestic abuse legislation, it took a year to implement, and that was to facilitate training and data collection and all those sorts of the things. They're not the things that grab the headlines, but the really important things. So that's exactly what's happening here as well. There's training facilities been set up, new data collection systems, and as soon as those regulations are commenced, that means that the domestic abuse offence will then be commenced in Northern Ireland alongside the Section 28, as I call it. It's ingrained into my head, which is the legal aid waiver as well.
Fantastic. So in practice, I mean, it'll make a huge impact for survivors in that sense. And I know that I work with Women's Aid Armagh, and just chatting with Eileen, the CEO in there, and all the staff and the board were really scrutinising this as well, and had, I think, given some responses as well to feed into that, because obviously this is very important for them, those working in the area of support for survivors of domestic violence and abuse, to see this push through. So it's fantastic to be at the stage we're at. But as you said, a long time coming, and it was crucial to get to this stage. Absolutely. So just in terms of that as well, are there any gaps? Can we do more? Can you identify anything else that we might need to do to improve services? And I'm thinking more around maybe the very, from reporting, for example, to get to that stage where people aren't afraid to access justice, because to report domestic abuse or sexual violence can be a very daunting experience. And, you know, how can we break those barriers down here in Northern Ireland? There's been lots of talk recently about, you know, institutions having a greater understanding of the victim's position. And so is there any way we can really improve that?
There's certainly other gaps that we looked at during the Domestic Abuse and Family Proceedings bill, and the committee looked at it as well, and I tried to slot it in turn, but it didn't meet scope, which was also to try and recognise domestic abuse as a workplace issue. So I started working on looking at introducing paid leave for victims of domestic abuse, following on from where it was a Green Party MP in New Zealand who had introduced this. So there's a couple of countries across the world that have this, and we're trying to introduce safe leave, we're calling it, so kind of the international term for it, which hopefully would have 10 days of paid leave for victims and survivors of domestic abuse across Northern Ireland. And we gladly passed first stage last week, and we're due for second stage in a couple of weeks' time.
Fantastic.
So we'll be having a big debate on the principles of the bill, but we're hoping to have this, as I say, 10 days as a day one right as well, so you wouldn't need to be working for a company or a business for any particular length of period of time.
Okay.
And also it wouldn't, you wouldn't have to prove with police reports or anything like that. So trying to change slowly that culture of belief as well, and introduce sort of flexible working policies, because a lot of businesses have been doing this already. Danske Bank have just introduced this 10 days paid leave in March this year, which is brilliant. I think it's the first company in Northern Ireland to do it. Vodafone have been doing it as well, and there's been a lot of push then from businesses and enterprise in England to have this introduced as statutory. So hopefully we will we'll get this through this Assembly mandate, but we're certainly pushing away at it.
That's a huge change, and a really practical one, and really important, and you'd see maybe a domino effect there as well with businesses taking it up anyway, but that's fantastic.
So there are still massive gaps, even just in terms of the field of domestic abuse. So big one for me will be RSE provision, which is relationship and sexuality education, which is completely lacking in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely.
And that for me is a fundamental flaw in the system, and that we're not going to be able to get deal with these really awful societal and family and personal issues to deal with abuse and misogyny and treatment and consent and reporting and all of those sort of things that come with relationships, if we are not teaching children and young people what is consent, what you can say no to, what a healthy relationship looks like. And this doesn't have to be teaching, actual relationships between people. This is talking about what is okay and what is not okay, where the barriers and the boundaries are, and all of those sort of practical things that people are just not taught. Like, I was not taught this in school at all. I had to label diagrams of anatomy. That was not sexuality education.
Because it's one of those things that
none of us were,
people are afraid to speak about. But it has to be spoken about when people are young.
And very often it is taught, or there are courses at third level, but it's too late.
Too late,
isn't it?
So we would and have consistently called for mandatory and comprehensive RSE, and also age appropriate. It doesn't have to be going in.
It can be age appropriate.
Of course it can. My nephew is 9, and my sister is teaching him age appropriate. Sexuality education, what's happening with his body, what's going to, but we still have this stigma against talking about relationships and talking about what was traditionally seen as the private. And domestic abuse has always been, even in the media up until relatively recently, something that's, at home. Yeah. That's behind closed doors. You don't talk about, they're just having a domestic. No, that's not okay. So I think that feeds into a lack of RSE and a lack of being comfortable talking and raising issues publicly, feeds into a lack of reporting, because people don't have confidence that their issue or what's happened to them is going to either be taken seriously or people know about it. And that's what was really important for me to continue throughout this process in domestic abuse. And I'm doing the same thing on the Stalking Bill as well, is that we need to train everyone in the criminal justice system. I remember having a conversation with the previous chair of the Justice Committee. He was like, do you want the cleaner in PPS to have it? Yes, absolutely, I do. Because that person, everybody needs to have training and needs to know what domestic abuse is, what coercive control is, but specifically for the rollout of this new offence. We are legislating for something that has never been legislated before here in Northern Ireland, and we were basing it on Scotland, which was the gold standard. And whenever I was speaking to the Chief Prosecutor as part of my work on and developing amendments, the one thing that they said was key in the terms of getting this gold standard rollout of legislation and getting it, everybody understanding it, was mandatory training of prosecutors. So if that's something that we can get, brilliant.
Yeah.
If that makes such a difference in Scotland, then why can't we have it here in Northern Ireland? And that's why it's on the face of the bill.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that we can't legislate to mandate judges to be trained. I absolutely get that in terms of the separation of powers. But I would absolutely recommend that Judicial Studies Board has this, that every new judge, everyone that comes through, it's not to say that they don't know, but it's because this is new legislation. This is a new way of talking about abuse. It's a new way of prosecuting, and I think that's really important, which is why we have that on the bill. And I mean, the Justice Sexual Offences Bill that we're currently working on as well has a number of recommendations from the Gillen Review, and hopefully in terms of court systems, court setup, and being present and being in front of your perpetrators and victims and looking at that, hopefully that will also change and help the perception around courts and take that kind of. It's very scary.
Yeah.
I've never been in court before. I wouldn't even want to know what that is like for a victim trying to face, or for anybody really. Yeah. I also think we need to just a wee bit more of a public awareness as well. And I know that the department are looking at that as well. But if we can train and train those that are involved in prosecuting, say, or investigating this new offence, and we can teach children and young people what a healthy relationship is, and we start breaking down those walls that exist on reporting of it's okay to report, you will be taken seriously and you will have somebody with you. You can
throughout the whole process from start to finish.
Absolutely.
And a plan in place for afterwards.
Exactly. And you can have someone to speak to, that Women's Aid are going to be there, or the Men's Advisory Project, or that you can speak to Nexus, or there's somebody there to answer the phone and support you through it who will be able to. And I think that culture being believed is something that's really, really important to me. Being
believed and dispelling the myths that are still in existence and still very prevalent around sexual violence and domestic abuse. I know in the Republic, the Department of Justice had rolled out a campaign on bystander intervention, which you've touched on there about the public awareness. So that's really important. So for this to work or to improve things, it's really a multifaceted approach, isn't it? Everybody hands on, and it's all of our responsibility to ensure that people feel safe.
Absolutely. That means it's very difficult.
It is very difficult. There's so many angles to it. But as you said, other countries and Scotland, they've done this. They've already put the wheels in motion. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing that here. And it's people like yourselves and organisations like Women's Aid and the many survivor supports agencies there who are pushing this forward, and of course survivors themselves who are hopefully at the centre of all of this when it comes to the research and putting policy in place.
They certainly are for me anyway. And I think it was the committee engaged as a whole with a lot of victims who were so brave in coming forward and telling us their stories, either in writing or in person in informal meetings. And I was contacted a lot throughout this working on this bill by a lot of people and a lot of victims. And I mean, I just can't believe what certain people were going, what people were going through. And I think it was very reflective of how victims were put at the centre of this, is because so many MLAs during their speeches in the chamber were outlining people's actual experiences. And I've only been around in the assembly for a couple of years, but I'd never seen that before, and to be standing there talking about a constituent or somebody that's contacted you and their real life story and seeing that reflected in legislation, I think that speaks to a lot of people.
Absolutely, and it's the only way forward, I guess. And with any, I know there's the abuse, the panel looking into historical abuse as well, are really landing on the real, true lived experiences from victims and survivors.
Yeah, and I see as well an announcement that came out from the PSNI as well that they've provided training to I think 4,000 people so far in the PSNI, And then they're looking to provide even more training as well. So it's not just the judges and the lawyers, it's also the police as well to notice.
Yeah.
I think they were talking about the unseen crimes for them to notice them, which is important as well.
And even for the banks and hairdressers, I know Women's Aid have been really behind that. If you've noticed anything and kind of spotting the signs of somebody who could be potentially, under a level of control that would meet the offence, you know what I mean? So there's lots happening, but I guess we're still missing quite a few important factors here, especially perhaps a strategy, a really robust strategy on violence against women and girls.
Absolutely.
Where does that sit, or is that something
that has been something I tried to amend the domestic abuse bill to get that on. Now, unfortunately, it didn't meet scope. So we tried last year, and we'll keep pushing. And it was unfortunate, very very unfortunate, that the murderer Sarah Everard really brought this into focus. But we've had 12 women in Northern Ireland killed in the last year.
12 women in Northern Ireland.
I believe. Now, don't quote me
Yeah.
on that.
No,
but
but
I believe
even
it is 12.
Yeah.
But that's behind every one of those is a family, and it's absolutely traumatizing. So unfortunately, that did raise the profile though of the need and for a violence against women and girls strategy in Northern Ireland. We're the only part of the UK and the Republic of Ireland doesn't have one.
Shocking. Yeah.
So it certainly was something that I wanted to raise. Something that was important to the Green Party as well. But we couldn't get it on the face of the bill. But the need for it is clear, and the Executive Office are to take that forward, and I believe that they are in development of a violence against women and girls strategy, but it's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that there's any excuse not to have one, but I do have concern that the reason that we don't have one up until now is because we have been looking through a sort of trying not to have a gendered focus.
Yeah.
Which I believe to be wrong. The domestic abuse offence is not gendered. It doesn't recognise victim, and rightfully so as well. The law is the way it is for a reason. But we still need to have a specific strategy to deal with violence against women and girls, and that doesn't mean that violence doesn't happen against men and boys. It does, but we need to call a spade. We need to look at the reality
much more
of
prevalent.
it. It's male violence. That's
against
the
males
issue.
and it doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly.
So we really need to look at this, and I don't see this as being any, there's nothing against Section 75 or anything like that. I know there is a sort of hesitancy to get involved. Certainly in the conversations that I've had over the last year and a half, but I think unfortunately the high profile murder and the continuing sort of harassment and threats made against women have put this into the spotlight, and I really, really encourage the executive to take this forward as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. It's so urgent. And then I guess in a wider context, we're really dragging our heels in terms of the Istanbul Convention, of course, and its ratification within the UK. Is that ever going to go anywhere, or is it just
10 years?
10 years.
10 years. Was it this year? Or?
May this year is going to be, I think, 10 years.
Yeah, I think it was the UK. So the UK, it's with Westminster that signs into the Istanbul Convention, but it hasn't ratified the treaty. So what we've been doing through the various bills that are coming in front of the Justice Committee is looking at that. Well, how can we put that into our domestic law? I feel like we'll be waiting forever for Westminster to introduce.
Exactly.
So we have to do what we can.
Yep.
Obviously, there are issues that we cannot legislate for in Northern Ireland. We can only legislate on certain things, but we can legislate on, and we did legislate on, sort of extraterritorial jurisdiction issues. So in the domestic abuse bill, it's the same as the Stockin bill. If domestic abuse is committed elsewhere, that can be prosecuted in Northern Ireland. So it covers the likes of if you're on holiday, say, or maybe on your honeymoon, for example.
And there's some of those things that you would never even think about. Like, obviously, when you're thinking about domestic abuse, you think within Northern Ireland, but how that's so important that if something happens, say, on a holiday that you're away for 2 weeks, that if something does happen, they can be prosecuted within Northern Ireland. Like, that's so important.
And it's also the things, though, that we can't legislate on, unfortunately, which is the protection of migrants and refugees. That falls under Istanbul and Article 4, and then resident status too. We've also, there's some issues then with criminalisation of psychological violence, but we don't have any powers over immigration matters, and we're that's reserved to the Home Office. But certainly I was trying and push for more resources and more focus to be on the abuse that happens in migrant communities, and because that is unheard. It's not heard. It's not being brought forward. There are difficulties in resident status, and people who are coming forward to have recourse to public funds, which we can't legislate on.
It's so common. It's a real problem.
So we've a lot to do. There is a huge gap. I would absolutely encourage the Westminster government to sign all this into
We all would,
domestic law.
yes.
I think there was actually
Absolutely.
a proposal for protection of migrant women, no matter what their immigration status was, and it was pushed back.
Yeah.
So kind of it highlights what the Westminster and the Home Office's mindset is: protection of immigration status or protection of women, and that was put at the forefront, was the immigration status first.
I mean, there's so much fear within those communities, and as you said, they're the people who are unheard. We don't know what's happening, so to bring that to the fore is really, really important. But again, a robust strategy should be able to address a lot of these issues. And then, of course, we've come across these, they're not new terms, or what can constitute an offence. I hate the phrase revenge porn, that's been bandied about. It's, this sharing of intimate images, and also how things like coercion can be seen as a form of domestic abuse as well. So these are terms that are coming, and it's great, that these are at the fore of discussions around, including them as part of, so it's not just the traditional, assault, and these are very important. And I suppose, with the growth in the use of social media, et cetera, these problems are becoming a reality more and more. So is this something that's featured, in covered by the terms under the offence?
Yeah, so in terms of coercive control, that's what the Domestic Abuse Act is. It is criminalising coercive control, and obviously if you're meeting the criteria that's set out. But in terms of revenge porn specifically, we've heard a lot from victims when we've been scrutinising the stalking bill. Not only had they had experiences of stalking or domestic abuse, but they were also victims of revenge porn, a lot of them, and public shaming and discreditation, especially on social media and use of messaging services and apps, and knowing or unknowing to them, and at the time, or else they found out after, or have been, it's been out in the public, and they can't control it. And that is awful. It's absolutely awful. And it's something that's being covered in the Justice Bill that we're looking at the moment. I'll be delving into the detail more in terms of the specific lines and the specific offences. The Justice Bill covers a lot of things, and the department are coming forward with another rake of amendments at consideration stage. So after the committee has done its deliberation, and it will hopefully deal with some of the gaps in our laws here, because I believe that sort of sharing intimate images with, obviously without the consent of the person that they are, I mean, that's not really covered here, because it doesn't include the threat of publication.
Okay.
So that is, for me, an element of control, because if you're threatening somebody with, I'm going to share this,
Absolutely.
if you don't do X, Y, and Z, there's an example that would be covered. Well, I could try and argue anyway.
That it could be,
be covered, but it would be my understanding that that's covered. But in terms of telecommunications legislation, those are reserved matters, and we can't legislate in the Northern Ireland Assembly on them. So we're coming up against this in the stalking bill of whether or not stalking be conducted online or on social media, and how this fits in. But it's very, very difficult to bring in within the lines and scope that we have. But police are in a hard situation then to investigate, because if they can't investigate, or they are limited, say with the Malicious Communications Act or under the stalking bill or domestic abuse, they can only go on the...
Their hands are tied.
Their hands are tied.
Absolutely.
And it's the same then eventually getting, if they can get a prosecution.
Yeah.
But I think you can get down a rabbit hole with these things, and then you go, what is an intimate image? What does this constitute? Whether or not it was, does that constitute in terms of domestic abuse? Is it going to be able to prosecute it under the Justice Bill? But we shouldn't be letting the perfect be the enemy of the good here. We need to have that covered, the threat of publication explicitly, because I think that is something that is increasing. We've seen it, but again, this is going to impact a lot of people, which is why we need mandatory and comprehensive relationship and sexuality education in our schools.
It starts from that.
It starts from it.
Because reading through the sections of the Act that's coming in February before coming on the podcast, and I think it's so important that people need to be educated on what actions are included as a course of control, and then also the different relationships. So it talks about it has to be a close, intimate relationship and what those is as well. So I think people need to be educated on those actions, because it talks about, it includes maybe 5 or 6 different actions that could be seen as coercive control, but I don't think many people would understand that a lot of them are actually coercive control.
Absolutely. It's people understanding behaviour. It might not be malicious, it might not be deliberate, but also understanding how behaviour affects other people. So, and particularly if we're going to be legislating about the threat of publication, and there's a huge body of work to be done with young people, as well as people who are over 18, but you've got that behavioural change needs to happen, and I always bring it back to RSE and that what we have as acceptable behaviour and what is not a healthy relationship, and it's not okay to say to somebody, it's not okay to threaten. I'm going to show or circulate these images. So there needs to be a big body of work done on that one. Absolutely. But there's a lot that we can do. And the Stalking Bill is going to be the one that we're coming to the end of the committee stage before the Justice Bill, but we're working on them at the same time. So there's a lot of provisions in there that we can look at to try and strengthen and make explicit to try and deal with these issues.
Fantastic. So it definitely is working alongside changing the culture, I think, in general too. So that is fantastic, and we're really looking forward to seeing the developments around that. We'll keep a close eye on that, and it's great that things are moving forward, but as you said, there's a whole body of work that needs to be put in place. So just back to you yourself. So obviously in previous podcasts we had Aoife Clements on 50/50 NI, and I know that you're on the board of 50/50 NI.
Yeah.
So she talked about involving more women in politics, and specifically in Northern Ireland. So you're obviously in politics. So if you could give your experience, we spoke about in the last podcast about barriers that women faced about entering into politics. So if you could give just a wee insight into your experiences, any barriers and any tips for young girls or women that want to enter into Northern Ireland politics. In Northern Ireland,
Loads.
I think politics.
Don't do it.
I think politics and Northern Ireland politics is 2 totally different things.
It is. No, definitely. I mean, as I said before, I didn't see this as my career path. This was not something I set out to do. I wanted to own my own restaurant and cook in it. That's what I wanted to do, or own my own bar. That's what I've done all my life. But
I don't know what's more rushed off your feet.
Stressful.
Yeah, chef or NI politics.
Probably chef. Actually, I think there's been some studies on that. But no, my sort of being a female in politics, there's so many barriers in your own head. Okay. And there's so many, there are societal barriers, and if you have, if you've got children, or if you're looking after family, if you're carrying responsibilities, that does traditionally fall to women in our society. That's a wider issue. We could talk about that for hours. So that is it. That's practical things. Do I have time for this? Am I going to be able to balance work-life balance? I find that personally very difficult. But for me, I haven't had a lot of the experiences that I know other female MLAs have, but I did certainly whenever I was on council and dealing with sort of a male-dominated council, male-dominated society, where the expectations on you as a woman in politics are a wee bit different. And in terms of facing a bit of misogyny or bullying and harassment, there was a survey done, I think it was Suzanne Breen did it a couple of months ago, and of some MLAs in the Assembly, female MLAs, and 70% of us had faced bullying and harassment. It's 70%. Extraordinary. And then we had a debate on International Women's Day, and we all said the same thing. Despite all our political differences, we all had the same stories.
Yeah.
So that just shows you But it is completely widespread, and again, it's something that we need to challenge, and we are challenging.
Good.
But for me, there was issues like people expecting you to go into their house for meetings rather than a phone call, phoning at inappropriate times. That you get that all the time, but you're expected just to be there.
Yeah.
You're working 24 hours a day. Social media is a cesspit sometimes. It is horrible.
I couldn't cope with that, to be honest.
And I don't get it as bad as some do, because I think maybe I don't react as much, but also I've only been in for a couple of years, so I'm not, I'm backbench MLA, so I'm not going to be as high profile. But certainly I have faced those sort of challenges, especially in council, as I say, with, if I was the only female at a meeting, it would be, well, you're here as the token female. Or you're here to, and it has been said to me,
Wow.
You're only here to make the coffee or put the kettle on.
You're kidding.
That's generally what's happened, and that's in front of very senior people, and it's embarrassing. And then, just because I think a lot of people knew my background in hospitality, so I was like, oh, sure, you go make a tea because you would be better at it than me, that kind of thing. And it's, whenever you do challenge it, it's then, oh, I'm sorry if that offended you. It's like, or
it's your
like,
problem.
no, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
It's yours.
Yeah.
So, but certainly my experience in the assembly has been definitely better than on council. But I mean, like, you get touched inappropriately, you get spoken to inappropriately, and this is up until, again, very recently was an accepted part of the course, is that's okay. But I mean, when you're saying about Aoife, 50-50 are doing a great job, and she's asked me to be on the board, and I'm really, really privileged to be on that recently. And it's really good to see that challenges are coming.
It's needed,
it's absolutely needed, and we need to challenge it as well. We're not doing a very good job.
There's another whole culture that needs changed.
We accept this behaviour, and I remember being interviewed, and it's like, why didn't you call this out at the time? It's because I was scared. And see, looking back on it now, I'm like, why did I not say that's my job?
I know, but
my job.
Yeah.
Come on. And you just don't at the time. It really affected me. But at the time, other people did call it out, and I was so glad for it. But I would never let that stop anybody coming forward. My biggest barrier is my head and my self-doubt and my imposter syndrome. I don't deserve to be here, I shouldn't be here. That I find a lot. That's across the board, but that's a specific barrier for me. But I would, if any woman, anyone wants to get involved in politics, do it. It is so rewarding. I would start off in your local community. If you're involved in a community organisation, you're involved in a group, and there's something wrong, call it out. Come and speak to your local MLAs, come and speak to your councillors, go and speak to your MP. If you want to start being an activist, go and do it. It is so rewarding. We have so many barriers to things in Northern Ireland, but there is no barriers, certainly, to calling stuff out. We clearly don't have a problem with having it, making our voices heard, so do it. I, as I say, never expected to be in this role, but I love my job. It is a privilege to be sitting here.
You can tell that you do. You're so passionate about it.
There's so many problems. There's so many things that we need to we need to fix. But if you have a passion for something, go and do it. And I have not regretted it at all. And there's not a one day that I turn around and go, I wish I'd never got involved in this, because it's brilliant.
And you can see action happening, which is fantastic. And that kind of answers our last question, which is about activism itself, which I think you've really covered in terms of how important it is, to become an activist or to be involved in something that you're passionate about.
Definitely. And there's so many, so many different issues, so many different groups. There's so many people doing really, really good work. But if you have a passion for something, it could be on a social issue, it could be on welfare reform, it could be on housing, it could be on, if you're annoyed about, which I'm annoyed about the use of chemicals on roadsides, for weed killer, because it's ruining our environment, right? So get involved, start shouting about that. You can. There's always somebody else.
There's always a way.
Then even if it is just an activist campaign, sign in an email to go and contact your elected rep. That's something, because everyone is busy and everyone has got a lot on, especially in the last couple of years. We've shown just the pressures of daily life. And not everybody has time to go and volunteer at a group or volunteer with a society or an organisation. But just if you can make your voice heard and add in and have a wee look at what's going on in your local area, in your council, at your assembly, come and engage with your MLAs, ask them what they're doing. Because that's what we're here for. It doesn't matter what age. Younger the better. I'll talk to anybody. I spent the summer working with the youth centre in my constituency, and it was brilliant.
Fantastic.
We weren't having big, deep, meaningful chats about what was going on in the
I
assembly.
know, but
We're
that's
talking
where
about politics.
That's
That's
where
what
it
it is.
starts. Yeah. Well, like, that is absolutely fantastic. It has been such a pleasure.
fantastic,
Thank you so much for having
It
me.
really has. Thank you so much. And we will definitely be following all of these developments, and would love to have you back again
I would
soon.
love to come back, and you may have me back whenever my bill comes in. So
yes.
celebrate in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rachel. Thanks
you.
a million.
Thanks.